You're watching TelecomTV's exclusive video coverage of the first ever OPNFV Summit held here in San Francisco. And it's time now for our closing debate, which is looking at OPNFV, where we've come from and where we are going. And to join me today to answer this question, I'm joined by four leading representatives of the telecoms industry. Thank you all very much for participating. If I can introduce you all from the far right here, we have Chris Wright, who's VP and Chief Technologist at Red Hat. Chris, nice to see you again. Next to Chris is Margaret Kiosi, who is Distinguished Network Architect at AT&T. Next to Margaret is Pradeep Sen, CTO of Network Functions Virtualisation at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. And next to Pradeep is Sandra Rivera. Sandra is Vice President of Data Center Group and General Manager, Network Platforms Group at Intel. Thank you all. Pradeep, could I start with you and ask, in terms of OPNFV, what are the aims of OPNFV? What has OPNFV was created to set out to do?
So very simply, I think OPNFV was set out to create an open source based reference platform which could help accelerate the implementation of NFV and its deployment.
Great. And if I can maybe, Sandra, if I can look at your perspective from a ingredients provider to this industry, why is Intel interested and supportive of OPNFV?
Well, Intel in general, we are supportive of open source and open standards. That's really part of our DNA because we believe the broader the market participation, the more innovation you get and more choice in the market. So OPNFV is the perfect project for us to be involved in, as Pradeep said, to accelerate what the market wants, which are commercial solutions to be implemented and deployed using an NFV architecture.
And Margaret, for a user of these solutions, AT&T is dynamic telco. It's very forward-thinking telco. Why is AT&T so invested in OPNFV?
Well, I'm into efficiency, and so we were all in an industry solving the same combinations, the same basics, the block and tackling. And my view is if we can do it as a community from an industry and do it once, then we can all get back to our core competency. I mean, AT&T's core competency is really generating new services for end users, and in the end, we're like now have resources now focused on this, and I'd rather get us back to core competency.
And Chris, what about Red Hat?
Well, Red Hat has deep expertise in open source software, bringing the open source projects to commercial products. We've spent a lot of time working across many different industry verticals, including the telecom sector. We're here to really help bridge the gap, to help understand what the core problems are that we're trying to solve in the NFV use cases that the service providers are bringing. Translate that into a language that's understandable to the development communities that are off building all of these infrastructure pieces, cloud, low-level hypervisors, virtual switches. And we're here to really bring those worlds together and then, of course, bring products to market to help accelerate this transformation.
Now, I know all of you have been participating in this first summit here in San Francisco. I'm just wondering, what are you hearing from the attendees? Because there's a lot of attendees out there, probably more than we thought might turn up. The numbers are very good. What are we hearing? What's the buzz? What are the issues that the people out there who are working day to day on this business, what are they asking and what are they demanding of OPNFV, Sandra?
So I guess to your point, I think that we've exceeded expectations in terms of how many people would actually come together as part of the project and be part of the summit. As you know, there's over 700 people here, which is quite a bit for a project that's only 1 year old. But I think that there's a lot to be proud of in terms of having come so far so fast and having an initial release and one that we're on the heels of that's going to come out in February of next year. But there's still a desire to go faster. And I think generally that's the conversation is, hey, we've got a great foundation. We've got a lot of commitment. We've got some wonderful ideas. But how do we go faster and start tackling some of those practical implementation issues of scale and reach? And so that's at least a lot of the conversation that I'm hearing.
Likewise, it's for Pradeep, I'm sure you're hearing the same thing.
Yes, but I turn it around a little bit and say it's not about asking for specific things and what am I looking for. What I've been hearing is people are surprised at the level of discussion they're able to have here. depth of the discussions and the variety of the things they can talk about with people here. They get to learn about the different projects. They actually get to meet the people in the hallways that are working on the projects and get into some real work. So that's very surprising to people. I come to a conference like Thing and I'm actually being able to do my work. So I think that's what I'm hearing, that they're really very happy that they've come here.
Margaret?
I've been talking to a lot of carers who came over here just to see what this buzz was. They've read about it, and they were actually surprised how far we've gone. To the point in a lot of the one-on-one discussions, they're really excited. There's actually more carers really seriously now thinking of joining. And they're beginning to appreciate the value of participating in open source consortiums versus before, right? The carers are more used to standards, right? And they know how to rationalize that. So the struggle was, how do you rationalize open source, especially if you haven't been participating in any of this? So they've been probably talking to a lot of us on what we see the value and so forth. And in fact, Philippe from Orange made a comment in the keynote panel that after being around here for like 2 to 3 days, he says he's changed dramatically his opinion of what direction they really should go. So I think this conference has helped tremendously the folks who are very used to standards and struggling with how do they participate in open source, that now they have a better feel for how to participate, and they now appreciate that they can provide value and they can get a lot out of it by just participating.
Chris, it must be very encouraging to hear that, and hearing that there's an increasing number of telcos now not waking up, but seeing the benefits and looking to actively participate.
Yeah, my first reaction is yes. But what I've seen here is really people falling into maybe 2 separate camps. One is people that we already know and we've been working with, and they're just excited to be here because of the high bandwidth communication that you can have in person. So all of the communication that we have remotely through email and phone calls, it's never quite the same as when you sit down together and really brainstorm on solving some problems. So those are the people that are in the project and using this as a place to accelerate their work. Then there's the other camp of observers who are trying to understand what we're doing. How do they get involved? So a lot of the questions I'm having is, how do I get involved? What does open source mean? What do I have to do? How do I show up? What does it mean for me to be an active participant? And that's exactly what we need. We need to be here to create the outreach to this next wave of people that can come into the project to help it grow. Because if the project isn't growing, then we're not going to really achieve our goals. So I'm thrilled. I have to say, initially, I wasn't a big supporter of this particular event. I thought, oh, we're doing all this work in the upstream open source communities already. Why don't we show up in each of those? And so I learned something new at this event. The value of bringing this particular community together far surpassed my expectations.
Anyone else seeing sort of change in outlooks and rethinking and being a bit surprised and standing back and thinking, actually, things have changed, things are moving on. Sandra, are you seeing a bit of a shift?
Well, I think I'll echo what Margaret said, which is that traditionally the telecommunications industry has not been a big participant in open source, even in the network infrastructure, a big consumer of open source based solutions. But we have really moved the needle dramatically in the last year and a half on that particular topic, where you realize that all of the issues of high availability, high levels of security, high performance networks can be addressed using open source ingredients and anchoring on technologies that have served other industries quite well. If you look at the computing industry, if you look at the cloud industry, that you can use a lot of those same principles of server and virtualization and cloud and apply them to an industry that is really hungry for change and for going faster, if you will, in terms of the rate of innovation and, as Margaret points out, to deliver new services. So we have come a very long way, not just in terms of the willingness of the service provider community to participate, but also to consume the products that Product's company would be delivering, and that Chris's company would be a part of as well.
But we're still operating within frameworks, within standardized frameworks here. We're still saying, there's been a lot of work on the standards for NFV. They exist, and we're innovating around that. Is that fair to say?
We're implementing those frameworks, but we're not bound by them. So we're saying is, yes, this is a good framework. This is something we want to start building blocks from and build the system from. But then innovation will tell. Maybe there's another way to do things and the framework will change, we'll see. But that'll happen organically, I think.
I mean, Mark, it's quite unusual for telcos to have this attitude, I guess, of we have a standard, but we can innovate and we are expected to innovate, and we have a lot of people outside who are going to contribute and innovate with us.
Well, the value of OPNFV is to take these frameworks, which are really more, I would say, architecture frameworks, and then you put these interfaces and you get into standards. But when you get to code, which is really what this is supposed to do, it's really trying to figure out how do you efficiently create the software blocks, which might not be exactly how the framework looks. So one thing we learned in AT&T doing our own version of all this, we had very similar framework, architecture, and then we had the developers get involved, they tweaked it, but then as we started really reviewing, working with all the projects and so forth, and getting to code, we changed. And we started realizing what worked, what didn't work, and we kept iterating in the change. So I always joke around, we like architect a little bit, develop a little bit, try it a little bit, and you just keep going around and around. And that is what we want to do here. We want to be a DevOps in OPNFV. We know what the end game from functionally what we want. The question is what are the software blocks, and then from there, what are the natural interfaces that go with it?
So, final question to all of you, and Chris, if I can start with you. How do we get there? How do we get to this end point? How do we take the momentum forward? It's only been a year and a half or so, but how do we continue that momentum and really push forward and achieve what we really can achieve?
Well, the first thing is really start taking what we've learned and putting it in action. So part of what we've done in OPNFV is build some lab infrastructure so we can create tests and validate that these platforms actually do what we say they're going to do. The other part is taking those learning experiences and part of the iterative process that Margaret was talking about, feed those back into the upstream communities and refine the base platform, the technology, and we have to get it in the hands of customers, and we have to get it out of early POCs into field trials and into real production, and we're actually seeing that. It's already happening. So I'm really excited about that. I mean, you think a year and a half ago, where were we? We were just beginning on this journey, and we're seeing real production environments running open source as a core part of the infrastructure.
Margaret, where do we go next? What's our next step?
Well, the industry is not waiting. There's a lot of, people want to implement and deploy. In fact, we're deploying now. A lot of the carriers are deploying now, or at least next year. And there's a lot of movement afoot on trying to do certain pieces open source. So I actually think we need to get more aggressive. We need to satisfy the community. And we have this tension going on in OPNFV of satisfying the community and the folks who implement worried about, are we going to execute well? But I would put it simply that if we execute well, but we don't satisfy the community, it's like, who cares? And so there's actually some discussion of like opening up, getting rid of our dotted line of scope, and even discussion of doing distros here. And like I said, in AT&T, we really learned this whole DevOps cyclical concept is so powerful. And the OPNFV community has to decide if there's pieces that are so germane to us that now needs its own distro, but we don't know what we want, and we've got to do this iterative process of architecting a little bit, developing a little bit, testing it, and so forth. It's not obvious to me we should actually have separate organizations. I actually think a DevOps is usually one organization. And I know it's not been achieved in the open source world as much, maybe Linux has. And I actually think this organization needs to evolve to a DevOps environment.
Pradeep?
Yes, so there's a different kind of tension, different from the one Margaret was talking about, which is also something we have to deal with, is there's the desire of the community to evolve and develop what they're doing and look at interesting things, perhaps adding on other capabilities that the community thinks are important. With balancing that with our desire, who are trying to get somewhere with this, our desire to deliver something useful. and the timing of that. So this is a constant balance we have to keep. And I am really, actually, I was a little concerned maybe a month, 2 months ago. But looking at what's happening now and being here actually at the summit and listening to what's happening, I'm a little more comfortable that by the B release, we'll actually have something useful to start with. It won't have everything we need, but it'll be something useful which we can start to use in user labs and in user limited trials. And I think that's very important because, as Chris was saying, if we don't get to that stage of people actually trying to use it and finding out what's perhaps missing or wrong and feeding back, this is not going to progress. So,
Sandra, last word to
Yeah,
you. How do we move forward?
Well, I'm going to continue on the theme of just do it. Right? I really think that there's only so much paper analysis that you can do, and there's only so much you can do in the lab. And until you get out there, you don't really know what you don't know, and some things will surprise you in terms of things going better than you'd expected, and some things will be challenges that you had not foreseen. And I do believe that perfection is the enemy of good enough, and sometimes good enough sooner is much, much better than perfection later. As Margaret said, the market doesn't stop and the market moves forward. And so I do think it's incumbent upon us to go faster and to be willing to just get out there and testing some of the assumptions and some of the hard engineering and architectural work that's gone into the project, but getting out there, putting it into practice.
Well, this group has achieved so much in so little time. We look forward to what the next year is going to bring. Sandra, Pradeep, Margaret and Chris, thank you all very much indeed.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.